what I'm going to talk about today is the biggest lie that's in the strength industry. And this has not changed my entire time in it. And it's always been the same, and it's the same today. And that lie is basically when people say it's not, see, I got visual aids. It's not that easy. And by that, I mean, when you're talking about periodization, which we're going to talk about today, and really anything, the response is going to be, well, it's not that easy. It's more complicated than that. And what I have found over all my time doing this and all the different spheres that I've been in is the reality is it's actually very easy if you do the things that they tell you is not easy to do. That's as simple as it is. It's unbelievable how, and the last podcast I did was about common sense. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take periodization and I'm going to break it down into common sense, because periodization is the model of all strength and conditioning, no matter how you look at it. If it's linear, if it's block, if it's conjugate, whatever it is, there's still basic principles of periodization. That's easy. I'm not going to sit here and say that's complicated. I can make it sound like it's complicated if you want and try to peacock in such a way that makes it look like I'm the guru and I'm the only person that knows how to do it, but it's actually pretty simple. If you compare this to an 8-bit video game, yes, I know I'm kind of dating myself, but what's the word I'm looking for? In all transparency, I never played video games anyhow because I just kind of sucked at them. But I know enough about them to be able to relate it to periodization. So if we look at periodization, you have a world map. Bam, there's a world map, right? The world map would be what would be called the macro cycle. So whatever that whole time period is going to be, it can be a year, it can be 6 months, it can be 12 weeks. But the world map is kind of leading to, you want to get through the world, right? So there's going to be different territories that you need to get through when you travel through these worlds. These territories are known as mesocycles. And then within each territory are going to be cities, right? Those cities would be known as microcycles. And then within each city, you have neighborhoods, you have the hood, you have the nice area, you have the not so nice area. Those would be the training days. So before I go any further, I want to kind of set some anchors so we kind of understand where we're both coming, where we're all coming from. Is with, first, I want to anchor intensity and effort. Actually, before I anchor that, I want to anchor the hood. I want to anchor the neighborhoods. That's your training day. This is what an average training day is going to look like for a strength program. There's going to be some type of main movement, some type of supplemental movement, and some type of accessory movement. That's standard across all different types of periodization. Within those movements, there's rep scheme and there's set schemes. Typically, in almost every case, unless you want to make this complicated, in every case, that main movement is going to be the heaviest movement. The supplemental, say singles, triples, whatever, it's the main movement. The supplemental exercises are going to be the ones that are going to be trained heavy for strength, say 3, 5, 6 rep range, but not as heavy as what that main movement is going to be. The accessories are going to be all the other things that fall underneath that. With the main movement, and even the supplemental, what we need to kind of anchor is going to be intensity, and then with the accessories, effort. I'm going to make this easy. That's gone. So intensity and effort, you have to anchor those. When I do the clinics out here, the train your ass off thing, a big part of that whole experience is doing just that. Intensity is going to be presented as a percentage of a 1 rep max, basically your ability to strain with really, really heavy weights, 1 to 3 reps. So intensity, when you typically see that, will be expressed as a percentage. I'm using the intensity to kind of explain what that main movement is going to be. That's generally going to fall in the higher percentage ranges, 80% higher. If it's RPE, 8, all these kind of things are the same cross board. But once you really understand it, it doesn't matter if somebody's talking RIR, RPE, or percentages. You need to just understand what the anchor is. So the anchor of that would be that if it's on a scale of 1 to 10, the 10 would be you strained your balls off so hard that the bar barely moves for a single repetition, barely moves. And if somebody would have dropped a feather on it, you would have got crushed. That would be a 10. Rarely does anybody ever train at a 10, ever. Even when you go and you compete, if you're a competitive power lifter or you max out, rarely is it ever a 10. Most of the time you either smoke it, which is good, especially if it's a PR, or you miss it, which is not so good, which is a DR, I suppose, whatever you want to be able to call that. But rarely is it a 10. So when we're talking intensity and what that main movement should be, we're going to be talking in the ranges of like 6.5, 65%, 70%, up to 90, 95%, maybe a little bit higher. But the anchor is what I just described. The repetition that if you've been doing this for 2 or 3 decades, you might have experienced it 5 times in your entire life. That would be known as what I would call an absolute max, right? There's a difference between an absolute max, a training max, and a competitive max. I'm talking about a training max here and just anchoring that part. This will all start to come together in a minute. Now, when we go to anchor effort would be on the accessory movements, but can kind of fall into the supplemental as well, as just a little bit higher. That would kind of fall into how many reps in reserve are kind of in there. Think back. Is anybody listening to this? I highly doubt there's any true beginners that are listening to this. Think back to any brutal set where you maintain technique, any brutal set that you did that you felt like your ball sack fell off, shot off, and went underneath the bench on the other side of the gym. Then you had to go find it and then dust it off, clean it up to put it back on. Somewhere in the ranges of 6 to, say, 12 reps. Now think of that set and ask yourself, could you have done 1 more rep? The odds are probably no. Not if it blew your ball sack off and went flying across the gym. I highly doubt it. That would be on an effort scale of 10, right? So that's anchoring that. Most of the accessories are going to be trained relatively in that 6 to 8 range, sometimes up into the 9. But if you anchor that and think of what that 10 was, most of the time people realize I'm only training at a 4. I'm only training at a 5 because they haven't anchored that. This is a problem that a lot of coaches have when they're working with athletes and they're working with them online, is it's really hard to establish what that anchor is when it comes to training those movements. So that's how a typical training day should fall. So I've covered anchors for intensity and effort in the training day before I'm getting into this journey, I suppose we're going to say, and I hate that word, traveling through these different territories, mesocycles. The guide for all that with the video game, boom, you have an energy bar, right? Energy bars at the top of the screen. The energy bar basically dictates your health. We have to throw that one away too. So it's going to dictate your health. So now if we break this down and you have those anchors, you have those training days, and you're going to start on phase 1, territory 1, the first city. So if you're in any 8-bit video game, that first level that you go through, that first hood, that first city that you go through, there's certain things that you have to acquire. There's certain skill gates, right? Somewhere I got a picture for a skill gate. I'm not going to look that up. But there's certain skill gates that you have to acquire just to get through that first hood, right? You need to learn how to, if it's Mario, you got to learn how to jump, right? You need to learn how to spin. You need to learn all these basic techniques that if you don't learn how to do that, then bam, energy goes down and you got to start over. You have to acquire those skills to be able to move on to the next, to get out of the hood and go to the next city. You have to learn those. When it comes to strength and conditioning, those are technique, things like rooting, bracing, the ability to auto-regulate, and not muscle memory, but what's the word I'm looking for? When you can feel it, you got to learn how the muscles contract and how it feels. So still brain dead on that one. It will come to me in a second here. It's all those still fall into technique. You have to learn the technique, and that's what that first level's for. In the video game, you're just going to have to keep starting over. If you don't manage to acquire those basic skill gates as you're moving through the game. You move through that, then when you get to the next level, there's going to be other skill gates that are going to be introduced as you go through that territory. Some other points of the video games to be able to point out that tie back into this periodization is there's coins, right? You got to gather the coins. The coins help build that energy bar. So that energy bar doesn't just deplete. You jump, get the coins, pick them off the ground, whatever you need to do to be able to get those coins. Those coins are your quality reps. It's your nutrition. It's your hydration. It's your rest periods. It's sleep. All those things are acquiring coins. So as you're going through the hood, trying to get to the city, which is going to be level 2, as you're going through the hood, trying to get ready for the city, you have to acquire the skill gates, but you also have to keep that energy bar. You have to keep the health in an optimal position so it doesn't drain, and then you can't get to the next city because you can't recover to be able to get to the next level. These are all basic things that kind of all tie in together. As you move through the game, there's going to be other components of 8-bit video games that tie into this as well. Extra lives. You probably won't figure those out in level 1, level 2. It's going to come down the line because it takes time to practice those basic skills to move from the hood to the city, to the country, to, I don't know, the beach before you exit that territory, right? So some of those extra things, like I said, are the extra lives, which would be bonuses that you get for doing everything right. Right? So if you're doing everything right, the energy bar fills up a little bit more. That's a quality bonus. That's a benefit from training optimally and from the recovery. You also have, once you get later into other territories, recovery modalities can fall into that as well. Another component would be the power-ups. The power-ups are things like caffeine, wraps, PEDs, belts, straps, sleeves, pretty much everything that we offer at elitefts.com, discount code Table Talk. All of those things can be power-ups. Now, here's the thing. The power-ups are going to help, but you can't rely solely on the power-ups. You know this from the video games because you're going to end up dead and having to repeat the level. It still comes back to the skill gates and acquiring the coins to be able to move forward. Another piece that somebody asked me about as I was kind of putting this together is how do you look at warp pipes and big stars and shit like that? Those would be more advanced training modalities, things like bands, chains, special exercises for weak points. I could put coaches in there. Online coaches would go in there as well, regular coaches. Merrick Health would go in there. I'm helping with the, navigating the coins and all that other kind of stuff. All in specific training modalities. Now, the problem is that that's where everybody wants to, that's the margin crap I was talking about the very first time. Everybody wants to focus on that, what the power-ups are, and not focus on acquiring the coins, the basic training, recovery, sleep, all that stuff, and developing the skills to be able to move forward throughout the game. So that's getting through a territory, right? Now, when you back out and we look at the world map again, where do you want to go? If you're going to line up territories, say you want to go through Canada, right? How are you going to, what's the path you're going to take? What's that going to look like? Does this territory fit after this territory? If I wanted to go from Ohio to California, I probably don't want to go from Ohio to Maine, to Florida, to California, if I'm looking for the direct path to go there. I want to build out a path that's going to take me through where I want to go in the most optimal way I want to go. So you want the territories to line up to what you want that end to be. At the end of the world map, what do you want that to be? At the end of 4 territories or whatever it's going to be, what is it going to be? And then from there, you put the territories together to be able to get that way. So the territories, again, are going to be those mesocycles. If I'm going to make this really simple, let's say you have a hypertrophy mesocycle followed by a strength mesocycle, followed by realization or a peak mesocycle, and then there's the meat that's going to be able to fall there. That would lay out. So you have to be able to first step back and determine, where do you want to go? That's the biggest thing. What game do you want to play? That's the question. Do you want to play Kid Icarus? Do you want to play Mario? And that's about the only 2 games I know. So that's about where it's going to drop off right there. But what game do you want to play? Fortunately for the games, all these are already laid out for you. The cool thing about training is you can lay it out for yourself. So decide what the game is, what the end goal is going to be. And we're not talking long-term end goal of a quadrennial or 4 years. What's the end goal in, say, 6 months, 3 months? What's that going to be? Then once you know that, what are the territories that you have to travel through to be able to get there? So let's say your end goal is you want to increase the strength of your squat, bench, and your deadlift. That's the end goal, right? Obviously, that phase before that's going to have to be some type of peaking phase, or actually a deload phase, but some type of phase right before a tiny territory, like a deload phase, and then a peaking territory, the peaking phase, and then before that, a strength phase, and then before that, a conditioning phase or hypertrophy phase that gets you ready for what that strength phase is. The strength phase gets you ready for what that peak phase is. That peak phase peaks your strength. That deload phase gives you enough time to be able to recover so you can express that strength optimally when it comes to when that performance is going to be. So what game are you going to play? And then what are the territories going to be? Now, with each territory, how many cities do you have to go through? Cities being microcycles, weeks, and how many hoods and neighborhoods is it going to take for you to be able to get through each city? There's the question. So what's the answer? The answer is going to be, what's the boss at the end of it? Because you have to be able to beat that boss. How are you going to know that you've achieved what you're looking for? What metrics are going to be able to determine, have you got through this conditioning phase, this hypertrophy phase effectively? What's the boss? Because you're going to have to see that boss before you get there. Unless you use some fucked up warp pipe and then it sends you straight through to territory 3, and then you start peaking and then wonder why you're all fucked up and things went south. There's a process, to all this that's very simple. It's very easy. You got to go through the hoods. You got to go through the cities. You got to figure out what that boss is, which you can determine. You have a coach help you to be able to determine that. And then if you can't beat that boss, what do you do? If it's a video game, you got to start it over, right? Because that boss should be the baseline of skill acquisition, skill gates, keeping the power meter up, all the other things associated with the games. That boss is the determining factor of where all those achieved. Because if they're not achieved, and then you jump into that next territory, a la some fucked up warp pipe that you found to be able to get there, then how successful do you think that next territory is going to be? You're not ready for it. So in some cases, you got to go back and repeat the level. Now, there are other things within the gaming system. If you're going through a territory and let's say 3 or 4 of these cities are just fucked up, like crime's terrible, you're getting the shit kicked out of you, the food sucks, the water's dirty, you're puking, you have food poisoning and all this other kind of crap. It happens, man. Sometimes you're going to go through some really bad hoods while you're in one of these cities. That's what, I don't have the image to be able to pull up, but that is what the, what do they call that in the games? It's the, it's going to come to me. Basically the pause, like the checkpoint, that's what I was looking for. Checkpoint. So when you're in a video game, every now and again, if you got to take a shit or you got to get some food, but you can't stop for whatever reason, you just know that you got to get to the checkpoint, then there's a pause. That checkpoint would be what we would consider a deload, right? So there are opportunities to have the checkpoints in these navigations, in these travels, to be able to help offset when you're going through a bunch of really shitty hoods. And you need to be able to get the energy bar back up, because if you're going through all those crappy hoods and everything's not progressing and the energy's just draining and you're not building points and all this other kind of stuff, you need some way to kind of regroup and reset so you can build that energy bar back up again. So the checkpoints are there, can be there, but should only be there if they're needed. So getting back to going from one territory into the next. So with the periodization, going from a hypertrophy into a strength phase. Now you enter the strength phase. New skill gates. Your technique has to be, all these things come into place again. The technique's going to have to be changed a little bit. It's going to have to be tightened up a little bit more. You can't get away with the same stuff that you got away in the first world. You can't get away with that shit in the second world, because bam, you're going to be dead and you're going to have to start it all over again. You have to build on that technique that was already developed. So there's more skill gates, there's higher skill gates. The ability to brace needs to become better. Your technical aspects and all these things have to be able to become better. They're going to have to get better because the load's going to increase. So the technique with the lighter loads is going to be different than the technique with the heavier loads. The nutrition and the hydration, all those other things, they're going to start to come come into even more play. So you need to be able to pick up more coins, you know, to be able to get through this and to be able to recover. So you're in a constant pursuit of coins. You're staying hydrated. You're drinking Element. You're doing everything that you can to be able to make sure all the electrolytes are replaced. All those things are being taken advantage of, and you're being very strategic with the power-ups. You know, the use of the belt, the use of the knee sleeves, the use of, you know, PEDs, all this other crap, you know, all those things, you're being very strategic with that because they are power-ups, and a power-up doesn't last that long. It makes you blink and shit, right? For, I don't know, half a fucking city to be able to go through, maybe even half a world if you go really fucking fast, but it runs out. So you need to know what the lifespan is of each of those power-ups that you're going to be able to use and strategically lay those out. So they're going to be able to get you through that territory and into the next one, because you're going to have to see another boss to get to the next one. And the other boss is going to be the metrics that are established to make sure you acquired the skills and you're in the right health and you're at the right strength level to move on to what that next territory is. If you don't beat that boss, you're kind of fucked here. But if you don't beat that boss, you got to start strategically thinking. How are you going to get through? First off, how are you going to beat the boss? Right? So you got to figure that out, because there's still going to be a minimum that you're going to need to be able to get into whatever that peaking phase is to be able to move forward. So you got to have at least that minimum. Hopefully you just rip through it, but nobody ever does the first time. I'll get to that in a minute, but you'll get through that. Then you're going to get through and into that peaking phase. And guess what? I'm going to repeat myself again. You're going to have to develop and reinforce the skill gates again. They're going to have to build upon what's already been built to be able to go through there. Load increases again. The technical aspects with 80% intensity is going to be higher than the technical aspects of the intensities that you've had beforehand. All these things are going to come into play. You're going to have to look for more power-ups because it's going to be a little bit harder level to get through. Hopefully you didn't exhaust all the power-ups and the other fucking territory, so you have some to be able to rely on to get through this territory. So at the end of that one, when you get through that and basically run into the final boss, you're going to be able to have the outcome that you're looking for. What I just basically laid out is the structure for a macrocycle, mesocycles, and microcycles with the training day and how they all lay themselves out. Where people peacock themselves and try to position themselves is in the sale of the best macrocycle, and not looking at what are the mesocycles that are incorporated in that macrocycle. You know, here's this program. Well, what the fuck does this program look like when you break it down into what's the territory look like? What's the city look like? What's the neighborhood, or what do the neighborhoods look like? Are the neighborhoods all trash? Are the neighborhoods good? You don't know, but here's the cool thing. The more times that you go through and play the game, say you get all the way through, and then you go back and you go to level 1, guess what? You kind of know the skills of level 1. You kind of know where the coins are. You do know. You kind of know where the power-ups are. You know where the extra lives are. You know where their hidden exits are. You know where all the warp pipes are. You know where all that is. Maybe you don't know it that well the second time through, but the 6th time or the 7th time, and the more times you do this, you know damn well where all those are, as long as you've actually completed the whole world. If all you ever do is go to Territory 1, Territory 2, then back to Territory 1, Territory 2, then back to Territory 1, Territory 2. Guess what's going to happen when you go to Territory 3? You got 3 times the experience in Territory 1 and Territory 2, but you suck at Territory 3 because you never went through it to be able to find the mistakes, to be able to know the adversity, to be able to find the skill gates, to be able to work it through so you can begin to learn how to auto-regulate your training and navigate that power bar. That power bar is freaking everything. This power bar is everything, even on a micro level. If we go back to, I threw it away. If we go back to the training day and we just take that power bar to the training day, which is the hood, one neighborhood. So that's a week that we're talking about. Massonomics coaster. I used to hold the papers down, running into shit here. Okay. So as you're going through that hood, right, the training day, you have a main movement, you have the supplemental movement, and the accessory movement. Optimally, you want to start each one of those with as much energy as possible. That health bar, the energy bar, is never going to be at 100%. There's something called systemic fatigue. It's going to build up over a period of time, but you want to try to keep it at a navigatable level to where you can get through that day. Right? Now, let's say on that day, that first movement takes it from 80% full, all the way down to 40%. There's not a whole lot left because you probably want to leave maybe 10 or 20% to be able to get to the next hood. You got to have something to be able to get to the next hood. So what are you going to do? Are you going to push the supplemental exercises the same way that you normally would? Or maybe you pull back on them. Maybe you just prioritize the accessory movements and kick that supplemental exercise out. You got to think of the energy bar and how it plays into that. What if that first exercise took it all the way down? Now there's only 20% left. Maybe you're done. Maybe that first exercise was not so bad and it only took 30% out. You push the supplementals a little bit harder to be able to go from there, because you need to be able to go from one hood to the next, one training day to the next, without that training day inhibiting the next training day or the next city or the next neighborhood that you're going to go to. So you don't want 1 week. You want 1 week to build the next week, to build the next week. That would be the perfect situation. That doesn't always happen. That's why there's checkpoints that I talked about earlier. But if you watch that energy bar and you manage that energy bar fatigue, then you're going to be able to get from one day to the next day to the next day. You're going to be able to navigate through that city, through that week. You're going to be able to navigate that to be able to get to the next hood, to be able to get to the next, and then get out of that city, which is that week, and into that next week. You do that by managing that energy bar. So where this lie comes in is there is no perfect territory. There's no perfect hypertrophy phase, because there's no perfect strength phase. There's no perfect peak phase. There's whatever we want to call these. We can call them accumulation. You can call them realization. You can call them transition. You can call them all these different things. There's no, forget all that. It's not complicated. It's fucking easy. Here's the territory that's going to build, back it up. Where do you want to go? What's the path to be able to get there? What territories do you have to go through to be able to get there? And then what are the metrics or the bosses that you're going to be able to use to be able to get there? Once you get an understanding of that, a more broad view, then it doesn't matter what program that you look at. It doesn't matter if you see a program that's got wave loading or step loading or undulating loading or whatever it is. All I ever ask is, where are the bosses? Where are the metrics? Where's it going? And be able to take it down from there. So quit falling for this bullshit that it's so complicated. Or people when they tell you things like it's not that easy. It is. Just do what they're telling you is not easy. They'll tell you shit like, look, getting your sleep under control. It's not that easy. Fucking sleep. If you feel refreshed the next day, you probably did what you had to do. All of this stuff is easy once you understand the roadmap, the world map, the macro cycle that you're kind of going through.